accepted the CIAF's invitation so that we could stay informed of current affairs on your continent. Thank you very much for your availability and your intellectual generosity. Many thanks to the President of CIAF for his leadership and this fortunate initiative. The CIAF is a think tank, a multidisciplinary and independent center for university research and expertise. The CIAF aims to be an intellectual space that contributed to the renewal of thinking on Africa from a privileged position that is Benin. As such, it is a platform for reflection and debate on political and socio-economic transformation and of the future of Africa. We are interested in the strategic issues that shape the continent's future. In this regard, the CIAF produces academic research. But however, the think tank is also involved in producing expert reports and formulating proposals and innovative recommendations for political and socio-economic stakeholders and the public. As the CIAF president says, the CIAF is a movement of young intellectuals and experts who are passionate about research and who do research with passion instead of doing passionate research. We are an academy, so our work is based on objective thinking, but we are also citizens, so we are focused on concrete action in and of your community. And to achieve its objectives, the CIAF relies on several research groups as the Governance Research Group, the International Affairs Research Group, the Media Studies and Research Group, the Agriculture, Environment and Climate Research Group, the CIAF Clinic Law and the Conflict and Security Research Group. Ladies and gentlemen, the CIAF thinks and acts for the Africa of the future. That's why with the sitting of Nigeria's new president, it's important to pause for a moment and reflect on the Nigeria ahead of us. Once again, thank you to everyone, and I wish you all excellent and fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Biduzo. And as the scientific director mentioned, we'll now hear from the head of the research unit of international affairs, Mr. Emmanuel Kukubu.
Thank you, Dr. Marietta. Welcome to everyone, especially to our guest speakers. The CIAF, Civic Academy for Africa's Future, is delighted to welcome you for these 2 hours for discussions on the Nigeria's African leadership under President Tinubu. CIAF aim is to think about the future of Africa. This panel is in line with this vision, focusing on the future action of the continent's largest state. With our guests, we will try to understand what President Tinubu's foreign policy will be. Thank you to our guests for agreeing to help us with this initiative. Thanks also to all online participants. I wish everyone a good debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kukubu. We are now inviting our able president, Dr. Expedi Ologu, for the introduction words. Mr. President, are you there?
Good day. Good day, everyone.
Yeah, good day.
Mr. President,
Mr. President, are you there? You're muted.
What happens?
Mr. President,
Mr. President, Mr. President, are you here?
you maybe have some issues, network issue, maybe. You should wait
Maybe.
for a second.
Yeah, I can hear you now. I have some problem with my connection, I think, but it's good now.
Okay, thank you.
So can I go on?
Yeah, you can.
Yes, you can go on.
For your introduction.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Hello everyone. Hello everybody.
Hello.
I'm very happy and honored to chair this panel on a so important and meaningful topic such as the Nigeria's African leadership under President Tinubu. Many reasons can justify this topic. First of all, Nigeria is the first economy of the continent. And secondly, according to the founding fathers of Nigeria and according to the Nigerian constitution, Africa is conceptually and practically considered as the centerpiece of Nigeria's foreign policy. Thirdly, in the middle of this century, Nigeria is projected to be the third population in terms of demography in the world. Fourthly, Nigeria is the most powerful army, at least in the West Africa region, its capacities being more important than all the other states' capacities combined. And fifthly, and to stop there, during the last decade, Nigeria has shown some procrastinations, some fragilities in such a way that Africans, in particular its neighbors people, are worried. Some of us are radically requesting the capacity of Nigeria to recover its leadership within the sub-region and all over the continent. And I think that the commencement of Tinubu's administration is an appropriate moment to put some core questions on the table. What are the main challenges Nigeria's Africa foreign policy should deal with? In which extent Tinubu administration is capable to address them efficiently? What are the ways, the opportunities, but also the threats or the obstacles? What about the regional security affairs? What about Pan-Africanism and the African Renaissance? And what about the neighboring cooperation? In a word, what does the future hold? For designing some tentative responses to those questions, we are very delighted to have on this panel Professor Joshua Olusegun Bolarinwa, who is the Director of Research and Studies of the Nigerian Institute for International Affairs, Pelumi Obisesan-Aina, who is a researcher at the Center for Democracy and Development West Africa in Nigeria, and Oloudamilare Ebenezer, who is a policy analyst and an independent consultant dealing with security stuffs and affairs in the sub-region during the last decades. So for beginning, I will give the floor to Professor Bolarinwa, as I said, who holds a PhD in political science and has widely published on international affairs, Nigerian foreign policies, and many other issues. He has also been the editor and co-editors of many international journals. So, Professor Bolarinwa, you have the floor for 10 minutes of introductory presentation. And after you, I will give the possibility to the others to give their, let's say, introductory remarks so that we can move on for the first round of questions. So over to you, Professor Bolarinwa. And thank you for having accepted our invitation. We are very, very grateful and very interested in your point of view about these core questions I just raised a couple of minutes ago. So over to you.
Okay. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, good day, everyone, wherever you are. I know with different time zones, I wouldn't know the time anyone is or we find ourselves. But here in Nigeria, I'm in Lagos, and the time now is 14 minutes past 5. And basically, I am greeting everyone and welcoming everyone to this all-important program about Africa and Nigeria's leadership in Africa. It is a very, very important program. It is also a program that is well respected.
Saint-Michel, Notre-Dame.
Hello, sorry, my earpiece had issue. Hello, can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can hear you, Doctor.
Okay, so basically, Nigeria's foreign policy, Nigeria's national interest, and by extension, what we know today as Nigeria's multilateral diplomacy since independence, has revealed that Nigeria's relative advanced economy in Africa propelled it to shoulder most of the sub-regional continental responsibilities. And by extension, such responsibilities have allowed Nigeria to sponsor, to support, to engineer, to also initiate and direct the affairs of Africa through multilateral platforms, say, for example, the Economic Community of West African States, which was established in 1975 by the initiative of General Yakubu Gowon, with the support of President Yasingbe Eyadema, who had done so much for yes. So who had done so much for the West African sub-region. So when the ECOWAS was established, Nigeria took the leadership, and Nigeria began to propel its leadership from the sub-region. Today, ECOWAS is the headquarters. Nigeria in Abuja is the headquarters of the ECOWAS, Economic Community of West African States. Again, Nigeria also was part of the pathfinders, original finders, the initiators, part of the initiators of the OAU, Organization of African Unity, that transmuted in the year 1999 and 2002 into the AU, African Union. Also of recent is the AFTA, African Continental Free Trade Area, then the Commonwealth of Nations and the United Nations, among others. Thus, Nigeria's foreign policy, Nigeria's multilateral diplomacy in Africa has yielded many benefits, which can be improved and leveraged upon with the advancement of its national interests, and more importantly, Africa in general. And we must also do everything, which is also part of the major issue within Nigeria's foreign policy and its external relations and leadership in Africa, as raised by the president earlier, that to overcome the greatest challenge facing Africa and Nigeria in the 21st century, which is the problem of identity. So generally, why did I give that profound introductory remarks? Is that I want us to basically understand and know that Nigeria, right from beginning, right from the forefathers, especially the first political leader of this country, Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, Nigeria's foreign policy has had its pillars. It has had its pillars on how to go about it. And the major centerpiece of Nigeria's foreign policy has been that of Africa. So Nigeria's foreign policy, right from 1960, has been African-centered. It has been Afrocentric in nature. And again, after Tafawa Balewa, when some other leaders took over from Yakubu Gowon up to Generals Muritala Mohammed and Olusegun Obasanjo, Nigeria's foreign policy became more defined, and its foreign policy objectives became a clear doctrinal way of defining it. So it has doctrinal terms, whereby people started writing that Nigeria was a leader on the African issues, and they were enthusiastic about it. Some will say Nigeria's foreign policy now had a radical thrust. Some will say it had dynamic posture, while some said truly Nigeria's foreign policy was non-aligned, while others described the period from the 1970s of Nigeria's foreign policy engagement as the golden era of Nigeria's foreign policy. So Nigeria's foreign policy objectives became more coherently defined than was hitherto earlier. So Africa was defined now as the centerpiece of Nigeria's foreign policy. And if you look at it from all of the leaders, rightly from Tafawa Balewa, Yakubu Gowon, Aguiyi-Ironsi, Yakubu Gowon, up to Muritala, Obasanjo, Shagari, then we now add General Muhammadu Buhari. After Muhammadu Buhari, General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida. After Babangida, we had General Chunekon interim government for about 3 months. Then we had General Sani Abacha up to 1998. Then from 1998 up to 1999, May 29, we had General Salami Abubakar. Then we entered the Fourth Republic that ushered in President Olusegun Obasanjo, then President Shehu Yaradua, then Umaru Yaradua. Then we now had President Goodluck Jonathan, and from Goodluck Jonathan, we now had President Muhammadu Buhari, who just left a few days ago and left the podium for President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. Nigeria's foreign policy generally, if you look at his profile, has risen significantly due to his commitments and assistance to liberation struggles in Africa, particularly in Southern Africa during the period of the 70s and even part of the 80s. And in recognition of this, Nigeria earned the status, or was described as, sixth in the frontline state. So Nigeria was called the frontline state, as well as given the chairmanship of the United Nations Anti-Apartheid Committee. So if you now look at all of the administrations, right from that period, even up to the present, you will discover that Nigeria has always followed Africa as centerpiece. Nigeria has always stayed non-aligned. Nigeria has always respected the sovereignty of the member states of not only ECOWAS, but also that of the African Union. Apart from that, Nigeria has also been helping or lending a hand of help to some other African states within that period up to this present moment. For example, after President Shehu Shagari, where he followed the doctrinal footsteps of the previous regimes, though very unobstructive and less radical in style, unlike what we saw in Obasanjo and Muritala to an extent. But he also tried to follow the same doctrinal values, radicals, doctrinal objectives of Nigeria's foreign policy, and making Africa as the centerpiece of his foreign policy. Nonetheless, it was under the administration of President Muhammadu Buhari that, as military head of state now, that is Minister of Foreign Affairs. As at that time, we call it External Affairs. So Minister of External Affairs, it was during his time that we now had Professor Ibrahim Gambari, who was then Minister of External Affairs, now it's called Foreign Affairs. He said that, and I want to quote, at the epicenter of this, he introduced what we call the concentric circles. That was the doctrine of that period in Nigeria's foreign policy, showcasing Nigeria's leadership in Africa and beyond, particularly pursuing the doctrine of the Africa as the centerpiece of Nigeria's foreign policy and showing the leadership of Africa on the African continent. And that says that at the epicenter of these circles are the regional, are the national economic and security interests of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, which are intrinsically tied up with the security, stability, and the economic and social well-being of our neighbors. So in that doctrine of the concentric circles, under General Muhammadu Buhari, Professor Ibrahim Gambari, the External Affairs Minister, was trying to say our foreign policy engagements in Africa and beyond, we follow a doctrine of concentric circles. Innermost of the circles, we show that Nigeria's national economic interest and national security interest. After it is the next circle shows Nigeria's leadership and interest in West Africa, especially the ECOWAS. The third circle shows Africa as a whole, as the centerpiece of Nigeria's foreign policy. And beyond that, which is the fourth circle, because there are four circles, which he put together as concentric circles. And that last one, the outer one, the bigger one, shows the entire world, the global world, in form of Nigeria's membership of the Commonwealth of Nations, in form of Nigeria's membership of the United Nations, and Nigeria has done so well. Coming back to West Africa now, you discover that Nigeria, at the wake of the outbreak of conflicts in the Mano River Union, particularly in Liberia, President Babangida, General Muhammadu Buhari tried to strengthen regional security of West Africa through Nigeria's foreign policy by establishing ECOWAS, strengthening ECOWAS by establishing and forming ECOWAS monitoring group. And these were made up of soldiers from member states, particularly from Nigeria. And Nigeria tried to put in a lot of money. And today we have a stable Liberia, we have a stable Sierra Leone, we have a stable Cote d'Ivoire, we have a stable Guinea-Conakry. And by extension, you can see what Nigeria is doing in Guinea-Bissau. Nigeria has 2 squadrons of mobile policemen, as I speak with you now, in Guinea-Bissau. I was also in Guinea-Bissau last month. Those squadron, mobile policemen, 2 squadron of mobile policemen, 2 APCs. What we call the APCs are the armored personnel carrier, what we call armored tanks, but they call it APC, armored personnel carrier. Nigeria bought 2 for them, training the military and the police. The same thing in Cape Verde, and the same thing Nigeria has done in the Gambia when President Yahya Jammeh refused to hand over to President Barrow, who won the election. I was one of the ECOWAS observers in Banjul when he refused. After the election, he accepted losing the election. 2 days or 3 days later, he said no, he will not leave. It was our own President Muhammadu Buhari who told him.
Professor Bolarinwa, I don't want to bother you, but I just want to remind you that you just have 2 minutes now to
Okay.
presentation.
So
Thank you.
Nigeria's leadership in Africa has always remained very resilient, very respectful. You saw what we did in Congo. You saw what we did in Somalia. You saw what Nigeria has done everywhere in Africa. As I speak with you now, Nigeria's Technical Aid Corps, which is also aspect of Nigeria's foreign policy, Nigeria still every year deploy graduates, medical doctors, lecturers, engineers, teachers in mathematics, in English, and some other languages into African countries under the Technical Aid Corps as a tool of Nigeria's foreign policy to give aid to African countries. So generally, Nigeria's foreign policy has always laid emphasis on multilateralism in its external relations. And we have done it for all African states. But the challenges, again, is that majority of some of these African states, some of them at times are not loyal. And that's why some people are talking about the principle of reciprocity. You do me and I do you. If you need help from me, I also need to seek something from you, that anytime at the multilateral level, at the bilateral level, you must always support Nigeria. You must always be standing by Nigeria. Then Nigeria will also help you economically, financially, and otherwise. So Nigeria has done so well. Nigeria is also maintaining leadership under President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. He has mentioned in his statement that Sudan is boiling now, and that Nigeria will do all in its within its confines to help Sudan and to make sure that Sudan returns to status quo and stability. He also mentioned ECOWAS, which is Nigeria's primary interest. The headquarters of ECOWAS is Nigeria. Over 60% of the budget of ECOWAS is in Nigeria, and Nigeria also financed the budget of ECOWAS to the tune of over 60%, infrastructure, resources, and everything. So Nigeria has done so well, and Nigeria will keep that status and continuously, as mentioned in a speech by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, ECOWAS, Africa, Sudan, other multilateral engagements from ECOWAS to African Union, to the Commonwealth, and to the United Nations. Nigeria will continue to maintain its stand. Nigeria will continue to maintain its leadership. Nigeria will continue to guarantee security and the safety and happiness of all African states within the confines of our foreign policy. And finally, under President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, Nigeria will be ready to conduct a robust multilateral diplomacy. And not only that, this will also lead to several commitments to major aspects of Nigeria's national interest, our national interest, our national security, the economic well-being, protection of lives and property, and more importantly, territorial integrity of the Nigerian state, the security and welfare of the people, prosperity of its economy, regional stability, and global peace. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Professor Bolarinwa, the Director of Research and Studies of the Nigerian Institute for International Affairs. Now we'll get time to listen to Pelumi Obisesan-Aina. Obisesan-Aina is a researcher at the University of London and a researcher at the Center for Democracy and Development, West Africa in Nigeria. Her research interests the dynamics of conflicts and crises in sub-Saharan Africa and the impact on women. She has published in the Premium Times, in the Daily Trust and Business Day, and in many other newspapers and journals. And her current research focuses on women's experiences and perspectives on transnational justice measures implemented against the background of the Boko Haram crisis in the Lake Chad Basin. She has a wide experience, professional experience spanning across policy development, communication, advocacy, implementation, and research. She has worked with Global Affairs Canada and the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office and the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. She's the founder of Teens Going for God Network, and her work has been recognized by the ECOWAS, the Royal Commonwealth Society, the USAID, and the Queen's Commonwealth Trust. Pelumi, over to you now, and thank you for having accepted our invitation for this webinar. You have the floor.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure, XPD. Thanks for the invitation. Hello to everyone on the call. I'd like to say thank you to Professor Bolarinwa for that introduction to Nigerian foreign policy and for taking us through the basic terms and concepts that actually define the Nigerian foreign policy, from 1960s to date. So I would try not to go over everything Professor has already taken us through. I would just I was asked to talk briefly about the future of Nigerian foreign policy under President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. So Professor has set a very good background as to the understanding of Nigerian foreign policy and its posture to date. And it is a good time to start asking questions around what would the foreign policy posture be under this new administration. So there are definitely challenges. Professor talked about Africa being the centerpiece of Nigerian foreign policy from the 1960s to date. But we know that even though that has been the case, and we can see that in the dedication of the country to the liberation and independence of African countries, and even the end of apartheid in South Africa. But we know that the Afrocentricity of the foreign policy has considerably declined in the Fourth Republic. Just like the Mohamed Obasanjo era, that's the Murtala Mohamed Obasanjo era, which Prof rightly said was considered the golden era of the Nigerian foreign policy. What obtains now with regards to what Nigerians go through in other foreign countries and the respect they are accorded, or the passport itself is accorded, is not the same thing as it was then. And so the challenges that Nigeria has been confronted with in the Fourth Republic has called for a more inward focus, and that rightly defines or explains why Gambari talked about the concentric circles and Nigeria being the center of that circle. And the Nigerian foreign policy under the Buhari administration, despite the fact that we had issues with security, with Boko Haram, and corruption was still a challenge, the administration continued to provide support, to ECOWAS the ECOWAS states, and it did a lot with regards to ensuring that internal security in Nigeria and even the wider Lake Chad Basin region is taken care of. Many countries, many border countries, especially Niger, were recipients of Nigeria's generosity, even though that was controversial in some, to some extent. But to date, Nigeria remains ECOWAS' largest funder, and it was Nigeria that actually initiated the funds that established the African Development Bank. And there are so many other foreign policy tools that are not talked about, including the Technical Aid Corps, which is the only institutionalized international service program in Africa. And it was established in the 1980s to promote South-South cooperation. So it's in the image of what you call the United States of America's Peace Corps. But these are learned Nigerians volunteering their time to work in Africa, in African and Caribbean and Pacific countries, called the ACP countries, and this is a very useful diplomatic tool. Some people have talked about its utility, considering that Nigeria itself is going through, its own challenges. So from what we are seeing at the new inauguration, the principal question is, are the main features of Nigerian foreign policy going to change? So with the way the government has started, its first steps in office, it's with the president's first administrative action being the announcement of oil subsidy removal, which is a necessary measure that has been tacitly avoided by previous administrations. President Tinubu has shown that he is willing to make bold and even unfavorable decisions that can ensure sustainable development in the country. And it is expected that because of his experience in government, he was a former senator and he was a two-time governor in Lagos State. So it is expected, and the same thing for his vice president, by the way, who was also a senator and also a governor in Borno State. So his administration is expected that they have garnered significant experience in governance and, policy issues. So while it is expected that the foreign policy will remain in line with the previous administration goal of reinforcing Nigeria's security and economic viability, it would be expected to see more bold approaches to achieving that. So the Tinubu administration may very well devise and implement one of the most audacious foreign policies in the Fourth Republic. We talked about, the Prof talked about West African influence and just how Nigeria is still very active on that front. The Buhari administration, in its pursuit of national peace and security, was very active in the region. Its very first trips upon its inauguration, that I'm talking about Buhari now, were to Nigeria's border countries. And this was especially because of the Boko Haram menace. And so even though it is the Boko Haram problem or challenge is still there, but we all know that the internal issues of your country should actually determine or dictate its foreign policy. So besides Boko Haram today, Nigeria is also confronted on different fronts with different security issues. In the Northwest, we have issues around banditry. In the Middle Belt, there are farmer-elder clashes. In the Southeast, there are, separatist tensions. And then there are also, in different parts of the country, there are just different militia groups coming up and posing a challenge for security. So it is expected that even though ECOWAS will remain a focus and the Lake Chad Basin region, specifically for the case of Boko Haram, it is expected that Tinubu will go beyond that to seek lasting measures that can, bring peace or sustainable peace to the country. So because even though the Buhari administration engaged with the LCB states and ECOWAS states, we saw that what we have now is even worse than what obtained, talking about internal security challenges. Internal security is now a prevalent issue, even though it was initially zoned to the northeast of Nigeria when Buhari took over power in 2015. So it is expected that if we must overcome this challenge, that the current administration must do things differently. Another issue that may change, or another issue that is worth considering, is Nigeria's stance or posture with the West. So this will all be determined by the country's national interest and the people or the leaders that the current administration chooses to work with. 5 years ago, we know that Nigeria initiated a currency exchange deal with China, although that currency exchange, this currency exchange deal was in a bid to reduce Nigeria's dependency on the currency of the benefit of Nigeria's currency, or the naira, on the dollar. So even though that arrangement has been frustrated in some ways by the IMF and the World Bank, it shows that Nigeria is thinking around moving away gradually from the West. And there are conversations or discussions around Nigeria joining the BRICS, which is like the coalition government that is advocating for a multipolar world system to move away from the West. So it remains to be seen how Tinubu's government or administration would lean towards these considerations. But we have seen that the West also is courting the current government with the quick acknowledgement, of the United Kingdom, of the US, when it was elected and declared as the winner. So it remains to be seen how the current administration would move in that regard. It is expected, considering the debt burden that the country is currently facing and the flailing economy, it is expected that the foreign policy would prioritize trade relations. So we know that Buhari's administration under, especially during his first term, he did a lot to focus on trade relations and bilateral trade agreements. He traveled, even before he even became inaugurated as a president, he undertook trips outside Nigeria. But most of those trips, or the trade posturing or leaning, was still very oil heavy. And we know what the economy is currently saying. We are not even producing as much as we used to before. That's the oil, and we should be thinking of a post-oil economy. So it is expected that if the current administration surrounds themselves with people that understand the economy, that they would devise policies that would take Nigeria's bilateral trade corporations or multilateral trade corporations beyond the oil sector. And if Tinubu's tenure as the governor of Lagos State is anything to go by, it is expected that it would devise means to make Nigeria transcend beyond, our current revenue. And given how we managed to generate revenue in Lagos, despite being an opposition governor during the Obasanjo administration. So it is expected, because this is what he did while he was governor of Lagos State, that he will rely heavily on foreign policy experts and administrators, first of all, to also increase his own government legitimacy in the sight of Nigerians who may still doubt his capacity. It is expected. So the challenges, there are many challenges. I talked about some of them. So I have a question that says, what are the main challenges that the Nigerian foreign policy under Tinubu administration will deal with? One of the main challenges will be the debt burden and its impacts on the economy and Nigeria's standing in the Committee of Nations. So a state that has a lot of debts has a little leveraging power. So if we're able to manage that, so that's one of the main challenges that the government will have to tackle, or the foreign policy would have to be designed to tackle. Secondly, is how to forge partnerships that are designed towards national security that actually prioritize the Nigerian country and the people, because the previous administration, in their attempts to, aid other governments or states in the sub-region, they came under heavy fire. For example, for the donation of gifts to Niger. So they have to look for a way to forge partnerships, geared towards national security that prioritize the country. Then, of course, internal issues of corruption that weaken the effectiveness and influence of foreign missions abroad. This is one big issue that the current administration will have to grapple with and devise a foreign policy that helps to tackle it. Also, just revitalizing the image. The image of Nigeria is quite, it needs a bit of work to make the country respected again. I was telling the story of the fact that I traveled to Cape Verde in 2021, and of also the US citizens were allowed to go into the country. Everybody that was from the Western, from the West, they were all allowed in, even for people from Italy. but I was there with 3 Nigerian friends, and we were put back on the next flight back to Senegal, where our flight originated from. And despite our cries, and we actually went on Twitter, we made a lot of noise about it and wrote articles. But then we even reported this to the Diaspora Commission, which Nigeria has. But little was done to help. So this is only possible because of a certain way that Nigerians are seen abroad. So this is also going to be one challenge to grapple with. We also have to devise new partnerships and strategies for post-oil economic survival and recovery. A bit of some recommendations for the new government, or some recommendations that will make foreign policy efficient, and useful for Nigeria and the sub-region. One of it is that Nigeria's foreign policy administration, which is like the foreign ministry, needs an overhaul and restructuring. This is very necessary to ensure that career diplomats are the ones that represent the interests of the country abroad, and that they are up to the task. I worked in different embassies while I lived in Senegal, and very few, in fact, none of the people I worked with, none of the embassies I worked with allowed someone who did not speak the language of the country to come represent them as an ambassador. And that was not the case for Nigeria. Nigerian ambassadors would come without any knowledge of French, and so they would not be able to mix with the other members of the diplomatic community because they don't have the language competency or even the geopolitical expertise or diplomatic skills that it takes to influence policies in favor of Nigeria in another country. So we should ensure that Nigeria is represented by diplomats that have the skills and capacity to make a case for Nigeria and the sub-region as a whole. Also, the nation's foreign policy posture everything should be done to ensure that corruption and mismanagement
Pelumi,
does not.
Sorry to bother you. 2 minutes more.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So handling corruption and mismanagement would be a good recommendation to ensure that Nigeria transcends the challenges that are confronting its foreign policy. Also, strategic communication on its foreign policy tools and efforts. Nigeria actually does a lot. There are very few countries in Africa that plays the role that Nigeria does in Africa, but it is not recognized. And in fact, sometimes it is insulted for it. So I was talking earlier about the Technical Aid Corps, where Nigerian professors, doctors, they volunteer their time to go to other countries and teach in other schools. And they are paid very little or no money for it. And then in the past 15 years, thousands of young Nigerian people have participated in that program, at least 8,000. And that it has come at a cost of at the cost of billions of dollars to Nigeria. And so talking about geopolitical positioning too, Nigeria should probably consider joining the BRICS to elevate its international profile. So that's all from my end. Thank you once again for asking me to join this call. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Pelumi. Thank you. Thank you so much. Now, the floor to Ebenezer Oloudamilare. Oloudamilare is an independent policy analyst. He has a background in law and political science with further studies in the Sorbonne in Paris. Oloudamilare also acts as interpreter, French and English to French. He has widely consulted in the West African region, and he's very interested in security and terrorism issues in the region. Over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
All right. Thank you to Prof. I cannot recall your name. Thank you, Prof. Bolarinwa. Thank you for an eloquent presentation on Nigerian foreign policy. Thank you to Mrs. Aina. Aina is correct. Can I call you Aina?
Yes, you can.
All right. So I read your last article on identity politics on Premium Time, by the way. And I found it very interesting anyway.
Thank you.
Yeah. So if I may rephrase the question that we're trying to answer here is, so if you are a foreign policy expert in Cotonou, in Lomé, in or just a government officials and everything, what do you expect from the administration of Bola Ahmed Tinubu? So since the time SPD told me that we were going to have these conversations, I have tried to reach out to the people I know very close to him. I mean, even people who served under him as commissioner when he was in Lagos State, to try and see or just hear things that may be useful for this discussion. So I'm not going to be long, but I would like to say something first. That is, on June 8, 2015, the Brookings Institution organized a discussion such as this. And I replayed the entire conversation this morning. And I found out that they were very optimistic. In fact, one of the panelists said that I think we have what she called a pink syndrome or something, because everyone was very positive about what Buhari was going to do, how he was going to transform the country. Even there were recommendations to him before he became the minister of petroleum, that he should be minister of petroleum. We have the time to evaluate whether that optimism was founded or not now. But a country's ability to project power internally depends in its internal cohesion. And one of the most important things Nigeria need to do to truly lead on the continent is to be a model, is to be the example for people. I mean, statistically, it is said that 1 out of 5 Africans is a Nigerian. So if you are in Lomé, in Cotonou, or in Dakar, thinking about your budget, thinking about your security, thinking about everything, you're certainly not factoring in that, okay, there might be a political crisis in Nigeria that may result into refugees flowing into your country. And even if you factor that in, you don't have the capacity to cope with it. So maintaining a coherent and stable country in Nigeria is the most important foreign policy that Nigeria can put forward when it comes to peace and stability on the African continent. Especially if you look at what is happening, for example, in Sudan. Sudan is boiling now. We can say a lot about strategic planning and everything and all that. I'm going to come to what I think Tinubu is going to do on both internally and on the foreign scene. But so when you look at the African map, you have Senegal. You gave a good example there of a country where the opposition is totally being stopped. You have Benin Republic, where it's a democracy with low intensity, if I can say that. Togo is a dynasty, is a family business, really. If you look at it from that perspective and everything. And I don't want to talk about Burkina Faso or Mali, we know what, or Guinea. The Nigerian ability to lead in the sub-region first. I'm not over-ambitious about what happened at the international scene. On the sub-region, because this is where our own interest should be. This should be our own geopolitical zone of influence, if you want to talk in that term. Our ability to project power across this sub-region and on the continent at large depends on our internal cohesion. And for that, I think having a successful election and peaceful transition with the new administration coming in is already a good step, a step in the right direction. We now have, we now show the world that not only we have a democracy, but we have a maturing democracy. It's not perfect. There's no perfect democracy everywhere. We had election violence. You can ask the Americans about June 6th and they will tell you that people invade the capital. We didn't have that in Abuja. Right. We have our internal challenges, but then we are dealing with them and we're moving forward. The history of the interaction of multi-ethnic group is written in blood. You can go back to our own history and look at it. Before we have the colonial master, even before slavery, it used to be that the Oba of Oyo would say that, okay, we are going on expedition today. And if you cannot go on expedition as king, you can't stay there for too long. And when you say expedition, it's other people that have been enslaved. That was the reality there. Today, I mean, if you go to Ife, and this is a very good idea, and you see the status of Moremi, and you read the story, the history behind Moremi, you realize that the Yorubas and the Igbos today, with all the HIC, you can vote, the MC Oromo in Lagos and everything. Today, the relationship is peaceful than what it used to be. And we need to acknowledge that because it's not another word, it's this word too. The other point, I would like to talk now about Tinubu. So Tinubu is going to do well internally for Nigeria on an economic front. I agree with you when you talked about his ability to raise revenue. What I've been told today by someone who served under him as minister is that possibility is that by the end of his first term in office, the Nigerian economy that is about $500 billion is going to go to $1 trillion or 1.5, if not more. I know it's very optimistic because you don't know what is going to happen in the next 4 years. If what is happening in Ukraine now decided not to just stay in Ukraine and become an international crisis, a major one, all this economic forecasting and everything is zero. But yes, it's going to appoint, as you mentioned, I know the right people for the job is not, and then the national political arrangement is going to play its role. But Tinubu is going to select technocrat. I was involved, I think maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, in a bilateral negotiation of border management between Benin Republic and Nigeria. The meeting happened in Lagos, and I spoke to people working at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Abuja, and I agree with you that the skills is not there for foreign politics, especially for, well, yes, I mean, we believe we're a big country. We look down, other people are small and everything and all that. But then if you want to influence people, you need to learn how to negotiate with them. And if you want to negotiate with them, you need to speak to them. The treaty that was finally adopted was written and submitted to Nigeria by the people from Benin Republic. And it was even translated by the Benin Republic to the Nigerian party. And when the Nigerian party reviewed the treaty, made comment, they couldn't translate their own version of that same treaty and send it back. So it was the back and forth. So we had challenges of manpower at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I fully agree with you. Now, when I say that the country's ability to project power depends on its internal cohesion, I'm going back to one issue that you mentioned, Madam Aina, on the removal of subsidy. Do I agree with it? 100% that it should be removed. Do I think it was done the right way? No. And this is the point here about internal cohesion here. So you have Nigerian spending money on first subsidy that is impacting the economy negatively. That's one. And then you have the cost of governance that is ballooning also. You have people who are going through high inflation. What you can do if you want to ask them to make more sacrifice is to say, okay, look, I have consulted with my government, and the higher office, the people in the highest level of government job, and politicians as well, they are going to take a pay cut. This is how we balance it. And then when you show that example of your willingness to sacrifice part of your own interest, I mean, these people are already well paid. If you're selling fuel for 1,000 naira, they can afford it because they get allowances for that. So the people in government are not ready to cut their own fat allocation, but they are saying that, okay, we'll remove first subsidy. And this is where the balance between the communication between the people in leadership and the Nigerian, this is where that communication is missing here. And that's why I mean govern by example. If you want to prove the people that the country need to make sacrifice, start by yourself. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Ebenezer Oloudamilare.
Yeah.
Now we open the floor to the audience for the questions. First of all, I would like to tell people that if you want to ask your question, you can just raise your hands so that I can see you and give you the possibility to speak. Emmanuel Awokweji, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I would like to thank the panelists for the various presentation. It was very, very insightful. I have maybe two quick questions. The first one is about the presidency of the new president of Nigeria, despite the fact that the election case is still in the court at the moment we're speaking. If I recall well, there has not been any decision particularly about the election process, and I was curious to hear your say about, what is currently going on politically speaking, about like from the elections to what the outcome seems to be at the moment. And the second question I have is about the relationship of Nigeria with the neighboring countries. So just before COVID, Nigeria had closed its borders with Benin Republic for a lot of months. Basically, it has disrupted economic activities in one way or the other, but there was still some informal traffic going on between the two countries. And I was just curious if you guys have any observation of the relationship of Nigeria, as this big African giant in the West African region, and the various neighboring countries that we have, Benin Republic, Cameroon nearby, and the two northern countries, which are also, in fact, affected by anything that's going on in the country. Personally, I believe that if the Federal Republic of Nigeria can do very well in West Africa, a lot of countries will benefit from it. But yeah, I'm curious to hear what you have to say about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Emmanuel.
Do I offer a question? An answer, rather.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Me too. I wanted to talk before, but you can go ahead, sir.
All right. So he mentioned the issue in court, and he said yes. So I believe that the judicial system serves the interest of the country, right? And this is not me preempting what the judgment is going to be, but the people, I mean, the opposition, actually, the case is most about how the results were announced and not on how the election was conducted. If you mean by conducting election, the voting process and everything, the issue was that some results were not uploaded online and everything and all that. Now, and the argument is that the electoral law requires such uploading. You don't want to ask the question is that if there was, assuming there was such irregularity, is it enough to invalidate the entire electoral process? Now, this is not the first time we would have presidential election and the president would be sworn by the judiciary is trying to affirm the legitimacy of the regime. And if president is elected, the person who is declared as the winner has never been removed from power. When it comes to the presidency, I don't see that change. I don't see that changing this time. So that's one. On the Nigerian relationship with Benin Republic, I wrote to a French audience on when he became president, and I said that one thing you can be sure of is that the border is not going to be closed in the next 4 years. From an economic point of view, Nigerians are making some investment, especially in Lagos region, that I think I don't know how that is going to impact, especially the port activity in Cotonou over the next 4 years. I don't know. So we can have that conversation and as we go in, but in terms of the border being closed or having a strong diplomatic relation, I was involved in some of the discussion between the officials from Benin Republic and the Nigerian customs and everything. And I can tell you that those conversations were not pretty. I mean, if you feel Benin, actually, those conversations were not pretty. And it wasn't just Benin. Niger was also represented in those conversations. I think that the issue was resolved through private diplomacy, some combination of public and private diplomacy. And I think if you are a government official in Benin Republic, you need to leverage on that private diplomacy. That is one. The second thing is that Benin has a stable electricity. I mean, it used to be when I was there. You have a relatively stable country, and I think your foreign policy is mostly focused on attracting foreign investment from outside. You could do that, the same thing, to attract investment from private investors from Nigeria. Now you need to understand what is it that the Nigerian business community is looking for. And the hic between the current president and the #1 businessman in Nigeria didn't have. So you can build on that, you can overcome that and everything. And I think the next 4 years should be better than the previous 8. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Professor Bolarinwa, do you want to respond? Or can I invite Pelumi to take the floor?
Hello. So the question, is it still about the closure of the borders?
Yeah.
Okay. So that was a very criticized move by the immediate past president of Nigeria. And it was done, the explanation was to curtail the importation of foreign rice. But we know that had a lot of consequences, even though rice was still being smuggled, like you correctly said, and other things besides rice were being smuggled. It had a devastating impact, not just on the traders that survived on that trade, but also on the perception of Nigeria as a rallying point in West Africa or in Africa, for example, because that was actually one of the barriers to the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area, and was also responsible for Africa, for Nigeria being one of the late signatories to that treaty or that agreement. So it was a criticized move. With the benefit of hindsight, the right situation that was being targeted, it did a lot to promote local farmers or cultivators of rice, but at the same time, it also had its own negative impacts and effects on the price of rice, which kept skyrocketing, and it's still very high till date. But yes, a government makes sometimes policies do not make good politics at the end of the day. So whether it was a bad or wrong decision, time would tell. But yes, it's not desirable for a country that's supposed to be like the beacon of support for the sub-region. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Pelumi.
Can I add more to what the earlier speakers have said?
Please.
Yes.
Yes, you can.
First of all, that the president was sworn in despite ongoing litigation. That is not an issue. That is never an issue, because in as much as the tenure of an administration was ending or of a president was ending, there was need to also put another one to replace him so that there will be no vacuum. Again, just like Mr. Ebenezer said earlier, you will know that the new electoral law in Nigeria has been very explicit enough and direct to the extent that everything, every action, whatever issues being raised in the elections or whatever was the issue or anything will be catered for accordingly. So there are provisions for every issue raised, grievances, problems, anomalies, issues, everything will be tackled by the provisions of the electoral law, and particularly the Nigerian Constitution. There is a process and they have laid down procedure to tackle that. So there's no anomaly, there's no problem inaugurating or swearing in the new president, our dear President Bola Tinubu. Apart from this, like he said also, the litigation will continue and justice will be dispensed as and when due, and everybody will see it. Even the process when it was initiated earlier has been going on clearly. People can see it was also normally reported. The only thing, the only prayers that were not granted to the opposition parties or other contestants were that the proceeding of the tribunal should be made public on television. And the court said that it is not any show or a courtroom, it's not a cinema or anything, so that we don't trivialize a justice process or anything as they may be. So there's not any big deal. All over the world, elections are disputed. It was mentioned by both speakers after me, and both of them who spoke earlier. Elections are disputed everywhere in the world. There are contests, there are issues. We saw it in American election. We saw it in the Indian election. We saw it all over Africa at the same time. You see what is going on in Senegal now. You see what is going on presently in Senegal as we speak. The crisis, the election process, and all of that. We saw what has happened in Togo, and we still see what is going on even in the same Togo. But beyond that, Nigeria has been able to follow stipulated rules. Nigeria has been able to follow the procedure. There were only a pocket of violence, and everywhere, like I said earlier, there are always issues of violence in any election. So that is never an issue. Coming back to the border issue, you know, African borders have always been disputed right from the 60s. African borders have always been disputed right from the 60s. And beyond this, it has also been alluded that a majority of the issues we face are over borders, boundary issues, movement, migration, and all of that has been the way the borders were demarcated or constructed, whereby there were mixtures and all of that. I don't want to go deep so that I don't eat into our time. But Nigeria-Benin Republic relations has always been, that relations have been very cordial. That relations have been very stable. That relation that we had or we still have is also very sharp and it's been beneficial to both countries. One good thing that has helped Benin Republic is that Benin Republic and Togo, they are a free trade zones. They are free trade zones, particularly Benin Republic. And that is why a lot of our imports come into Benin Republic, particularly automobiles and textiles. Automobiles and textiles. And you now see that Nigerians prefer to buy cars, motor vehicles, automobiles generally. Nigerians prefer to buy automobiles from Benin Republic because they are cheaper, being free trade zone, unlike buying in Nigeria where they pay handsomely. So that has also been part of the relation. But beyond that, what has led to the closure of the borders over time was among others, the issue of illegal migration, smuggling, kidnapping, all other problems associated with clandestine movements like small arms and light weapons movements. All of these are fueling conflicts in Nigeria. And so therefore, it was reported that Nigeria and Benin Republic, or Nigeria and its neighbors, we share porous borders. These porous borders are affecting not just the economy, not just the living standard of the people in Nigeria, but also the security, which is the major thing. So illegal banditry, illegal movement, smuggling, not just rice, even human trafficking, drug trafficking, money laundering. A lot of issues are involved. Unfortunately, the ECOWAS free movement protocol also has been misinterpreted or wrongly applied in some quarters. I've written a lot about it. Even if you Google it, just say ECOWAS free movement protocol, you will see one of my recent papers on ECOWAS free movement protocols. And all of these, they've said that application of that protocol in member countries in the ECOWAS zone or sub-region has been affecting the security, the economy.
Prof, can I ask you a question on that? Can I ask you a question?
Yes,
are you suggesting there are more Beninese, for example, in Nigeria than there are Nigerians outside in Benin? Is that what you're suggesting?
What did you say, sir? I didn't hear you.
Are you suggesting that reason why the border was closed, there are a lot more, many unregulated migration of Benin Republic people into the country? Are you suggesting that's the reason?
Not only that, that's why I said so many things are involved. You know,
no, I want to know if that is part of your own analysis of the situation.
It is. Illegal migration is part of it.
Yeah, I don't think you're correct on that.
I said illegal migration. We're not arguing over an issue. It's
I heard you.
Hello?
I heard you. Yes, I heard you.
Well, sir? Can you listen well?
Yes.
Ebenezer, could you leave Professor finish and then you can come back so that you can give your opinion, please?
All right.
We are not even arguing here. A question was said or raised about the border closure and how it's been affecting Benin Republic people. That was the question. And again, issues over the election. That was the man's questions. Those are the two aspects of the questions. You were able to elaborate very well on the issue of the ongoing litigation, all those things, which I also concord with, and I also put additional this thing. Then I move further on the issue of the border closure. Pelumi mentioned that majority of the farmers or production inside Nigeria was affected to a larger extent. Nigerians cried over issues, particularly over the issue of foreign rice or rice and all of that. So I picked up from where you and Pelumi stopped. I said,
I know that.
I said beyond rice, beyond rice. First of all, I tried to elaborate on the issue of litigation, which I've cleared very well. Now, on the issue of border closure, there were many reasons. So not one factor led to the closure of the borders, not one factor. So one factor was what Pelumi mentioned. You also mentioned one about trade, about Lagos, about what is happening between Lagos and Cotonou. I'm also just professionally, academically, and for studies we have conducted for ECOWAS. I'm just adding to it. I'm just adding to
illegal migration, right?
Oh yes, illegal migration. It happens both ways. It happens both ways. Even Nigerians also use Benin Republic as transit points onward to other places. You remember the issue of Sunday Igboho when he escaped. Sunday Igboho, when he escaped from Nigeria, the immediate place, he could not go to Niger, he could not go to Cameroon, he could not go to Chad, but he chose to come through Benin Republic. The reason is that because Benin, particularly for him and for cultural relations, Nigeria-Benin relations, or Seme border or Idiroko border, we border seriously there, and even in Niger States. Those are the three places where Nigeria and Benin Republic border very well. But it is more porous for human movement in Seme and Idiroko. If you have been to Seme borders or even Idiroko, which we have done, is that there is a bike, there are bikers from that filling station. Then the last time we went as at last year, for you to move from this end of Lagos, Badagry, Seme border here, into Seme border of Cotonou on the other side, it's 1,000 naira as I speak with you now. Maybe people there can testify to it. It's 1,000 naira. You climb the bike, you go. If you climb the bike, you know, mostly you are unchecked. Mostly you are unchecked because part of the money you paid has covered your movement. Yes, I'm coming. So I will round up so that other people can raise their questions. So I was just elaborating that illegal migration, human trafficking, migration, human trafficking, then the need for trading activities, especially trade without statistics. I gave the example of Nigerians going to buy automobiles in that country because it's cheaper, and they will quickly move it into the country unregistered. They will now move to Nigeria and try to register it. But there are certain custom duties, excise duties you are supposed to pay at that place. So people like to go through illegal routes, alternative routes. All of these factors put together drove the reasons why the government under President Muhammadu Buhari closed the borders. But meanwhile, both of you said something which I love, particularly Pelumi said, but whether the closure was now good or bad, or had its benefits or not, either for Nigeria or for Benin Republic, is a different ball game or it's a different discussion. But to a larger extent, Nigerian businessmen, particularly farmers, especially on the issue of rice and those selling automobiles, they still believed that they enjoyed a bit better because now Nigerians can still go and buy motor vehicles or automobiles from the neighboring country. I've also done it before. So a lot of factors. Factors contributed to.
Ebenezer, could you allow me to give the floor to those who want to ask questions?
Please go
ahead. I just elaborated for that. Thank you.
So, Alimi, we cannot hear you, Alimi. We cannot hear you. So,
sorry. Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're very clear.
Yeah, it is
Hello,
good
can
now.
you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, thank you.
Please? Okay.
Hello?
Go ahead, go ahead.
All right, thank you, Prof. Damilare and Pelumi for your, insightful contribution. Yeah, I think, you have done justice to the topic. And my own contribution regards, Tinubu's leadership, or let me say statesmanship. And the first thing I believe he might be able to do is to be able to provide us with a kind of national orientation as the head of state. And this is based on the fact that he was able to draw a kind of roadmap for Lagos State. And if Lagos State is, growing and, developing today, we cannot, neglect his own part that is played. And we expect to see that at the federal level. And that's as regards, national, policy is concerned. And when you look at the, foreign policy, Nigeria used to have what, it's called, concentric theory of, foreign policy. I think Professor Olusegun wrote on that. And, the thing is, Nigeria needs to take care of its neighbor. For instance, we have seen that during the previous regime, either military or, democratic elected, where Nigeria is, always at the vanguard of, making sure that the neighborhood is, quiet and peaceful. But the challenges, national, internal challenges, local challenges, as derail Nigeria from its, natural, role in the sub-region and the region, and it made things difficult for the country. But we hope that the issue with Benin Republic is going to be solved, because Nigeria is, with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which Nigeria is taking seriously. I think things are going to be better. And the fact that the previous government closed border with Benin doesn't mean that Nigeria is not friendly with Benin. Of course, in international relations, there are some rules and all that as countries we need to respect. And Nigeria will always frown on the fact that a country will be using, its backyard as a way of smuggling goods to the detriment of national economy. That is that. And on the question of, the electoral petition going on, I think it has been a tradition in Nigeria for, opposition party to go to court. Either they have legitimate cause or not. They think that it's a tradition to do that. And that the fact that there is a case pending in court doesn't, stop the inauguration of the incoming president. So it has been, a tradition in Nigeria. And I'm not insinuating that, the political parties, opposition party don't have a legitimate cause, nor that the judiciary is trying to gloss over their legitimacy. It has always been the practice because of the kind of constitutional arrangement we have. In some countries like Benin, there is a particular court that has to handle electoral petitions. But with the current judicial arrangement we have, it is going to be difficult for these judges to sit within that short period and decide electoral petition. So thank you very much. That's my own contribution to the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Alimi. Thierry Bidouzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear speakers, it is a verse that what Nigeria does or does not do influences the sub-region in one way or another. I remember that in 1993, at Nigeria's instigation, the ECOWAS intervention force intervened militarily in Guinea-Bissau and Sierra Leone without the authorization of the United Nations Security Council. So the Council only passed a resolution downstream to legalize the intervention. This was the first in the history of peacemaking or peacekeeping. So knowing Tinubu, knowing his personality, do you think the man of evolution or of revolution? For example, in terms of security, the fight against terrorism can Nigeria advance the sub-regional fight, not only in terms of legal instruments, but also operational bodies? Thank you.
Pelumi, can you try to respond to Thierry Bidouzo?
Hello, Cherry, I'm sorry, I missed some part of your question. Could you maybe rephrase?
First of all, the 1993 intervention of Nigeria has been done without the authorization of the United Nations Council. So do you think that Tinubu's administration can do the same if there is an issue in the sub-region on which the intervention of Nigeria would be necessary?
So the intervention of Nigeria
without any international authorization.
Yes, you mean in which country?
I mean, the question is, if there's any crisis somewhere today within the sub-region, is the Nigerian army ready to intervene to stabilize the situation?
Such as like in Guinea-Bissau, like in Nigeria, like in Sierra Leone in the past.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. So like Prof mentioned, when he opened the session with his presentation, it mentioned several instances where Nigeria, personally as as a country, and also in cooperation or collaboration with other states through ECOMOG, as independently or spearheaded efforts to lead peacekeeping missions in many places. So I believe Nigeria does not, especially when it concerns issues of the sub-region, Nigeria or ECOWAS does not depend on approval from the UN to intervene on issues that are regarding states in West Africa. So it's not something to expect or that can delegitimize an intervention just because the UN does not approve. As long as the ECOWAS community members believe this is needed, then I believe we can expect to see Nigeria doing similar interventions, like which they keep doing, and as recently as this year in Guinea-Bissau.
Yeah.
So what do you think about the comportment of President Tinubu comparing to his predecessors concerning this kind of intervention? Do you think that he could do the same like his predecessors?
So from what I know about the personality of President Tinubu and from his governance style, I believe that he heavily relies on advisors and technocrats. So to do something similar, so Buhari was very active on the West African scene, especially when it had to do with keeping Morocco out of the union of the West African community. Exactly. So we can expect to see the President Tinubu also exercising that same level of influence. But on decisions whether or not he can do things like that, I would not be able to say categorically yes or no. It will depend on the quality of his advisors or the people he surrounds himself with.
Can I say what?
Yes.
Just in 2 minutes, Ebenezer. 2 minutes. Right. Not more than that.
On the first question, the question of whether Tinubu is going to intervene in a hypothetical conflict within the sub-region, the answer is yes. Whether you want to do that, the answer is yes. Whether Nigeria will have the resources to make meaningful impact in such conflict, that is the main question. Because the Nigerian internal resources are stretched now by internal conflict, internal issues. So it's not the willingness, it's not the desire, it's whether the resources is available to make any meaningful impact. Thank you.
Valentin Adibocha wants to speak. Valentin, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. SPD. It's a pleasure for me to be part of this meeting. I would like to know what will be the impact of the declaration of Tinubu about petrol policy in Nigeria. And my second question is can I put my 4 questions together?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
Okay, the second question will be the influence of Nigeria on the sub-region economy. The third question, what is past policy about corruption in Nigeria? And my last question, do you think there will be a change of position of Nigeria talking about the common currency, ECOWAS currency? These are my questions.
Thank you so much, Valentin. Professor Bolarinwa, what do you think about the petrol policy of Ahmed Tinubu?
Say it again. What do I think of?
The policy about oil.
Okay, of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu.
Yeah, one of the first decisions he has been taken when he's in office now.
Yes, let's make a clarification first. The decision he has taken over the oil subsidy in the country, though, as somebody who also understands the terrain, if you remember, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu resigned from Mobi International at the global level before he came to Lagos to become the governor in 1999 and some other things like that. So he has been a very big player in the oil industry, especially even before he became a senator, from there, a governor and all of that onwardly. Beyond that, removal of subsidy from the budget was done by President Muhammadu Buhari's administration. He only announced it. But of course, from his manifesto and during his campaigns, he himself has also said that he's going to remove this subsidy if he becomes the president. But fortunately, the previous administration had helped him and made his work so easy. And that was why on the day of his inauguration, it was very clear to say in the budget given to me that I'm going to work with from now on, fuel subsidy has been removed. Subsidy has been removed and that is already gone. But we will roll out palliatives, we will know what to do, how to cushion it, and how to make things easy for Nigerians. And that was why he had to announce it. But you can see what followed his announcement. Immediately he announced that thing, despite that it was said that it will take effect from early July, by end of June, and from July it will take effect. Even the oil marketers had already started to introduce that thing right away now. And that's why Nigerians are clamoring for, why did it happen? Why? But in the real sense, the explanation around the fuel subsidy goes a long way. And somebody like me also share from the president that it has to go because the government will pay for fuel imports into the country, or they are bringing into the country. The oil exporters will bring it in, and when they bring in this fuel, they still siphon it to the neighboring countries. They sell it to the neighboring countries at the expense of the country and the citizens in which the subsidy was paid for. So who is enjoying it now? Them, not the citizens. Secondly, these fuel or oil marketers, when they were giving, or each time they give them certain quantity to import, they increase what they import, and yet they ask for the money the government pays for everything. They still sell to other countries. They still audit. They still make it seriously unavailable and create what we call artificial scarcity all over the country. And so on and so forth. A lot of issues are created around this fuel subsidy and the issue or the pains. Yes, of course, that is being removed right away now by the president. is already creating and garnering so much issues, problems in the country, but it's for the meantime. The president has said that it's just for the meantime. Policies, palliatives, other things are being put in place to alleviate the pains, to reduce the pains, and to know what to do. Again, that sends another signal to Nigerians. Maybe that reduces our consumption of the fuel too. On the part of government, exchange rate should be unified, as the president also has announced. That will affect the supply of oil too, in which the president is looking at. So hopefully the president has a good plan, and that's why starting well and starting on a clean slate, let us announce to the people on a very plain ground that fuel subsidy is gone. It has been removed, but we'll feel the pain for a while, and after which we will try to normalize everything. Just bear with us. But of course, you will agree with me that there is no development without pain. Everywhere that development has taken place, there have been one or two challenges, bottlenecks, and development comes with pain. So I believe President Tinubu, just like others have said, has so much experience, has so much visions, and is also an actualizer of visions. So he knows how to put his team together. He knows what to do, and he also knows how to go about trying to resolve this oil issue, oil or fuel subsidy crisis. I know in the next few days and weeks, it will be totally resolved, and we pray that God will grant him the wisdom to resolve it very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Pelumi, what do you think about the echo, the currency echo? Do you think that Tinubu administration will follow the position of Buhari administration, or there will be a change in this position of Nigeria about the echo currency?
So the echo currency, I believe almost all countries were on board with the launch of the currency, and with ECOWAS introducing it. But the problem is, it's beyond one particular country's willingness. It actually has to do with interference on a geopolitical scale. So I remember when it was designed and everyone agreed, okay, there would be, and actually a date was set, for the ECHO. But then
2019 to have started.
Exactly. So a date was set for it, but then President Macron, together with the president of Côte d'Ivoire at the time, Ouattara, they came and announced reforms to the CFA, and then they said they also wanted to launch a currency called the ECHO. So I think it has less to do with one like Nigerian president stance with it, but internal sabotages or just foreign interference. So if as a group, so what we can be expecting, or what we hope to see, is more leadership on the part of Nigeria to steer, if we believe this is the right economic decision and it would mean well for the economy. It's not just be another currency design exercise that will have no imports on the economic progress of states in West Africa. If this currency change, we know it would reinforce prosperity, then we should be looking to Nigeria, for leadership. And if President Bola Ahmed Tinubu sees that this is something that can aid the progress and growth of not just Nigeria, but also countries in the sub-region, it is something that we'll be willing to provide the much needed leadership on. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Pelumi. Ebenezer, what about the influence of Nigeria on the regional or the sub-regional economy?
Let's say a few words about ECHO before I answer your question. I have a different perspective on it. So, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there. Yeah.
All right. So, as to my knowledge, the Nigerian position on ECHO will not change under Tinubu. The reason is that I mean, this is not Nigeria doing the sub-region a favor here. It's a win-win situation for Nigeria. In September last year, the ECOWAS gathered the governors, I mean the experts, to put in place the financial institutions that would power the economy. Because what they realize is that going into a single currency without having the financial infrastructure to back it up is just not going to work. So for example, if you're paying in this, making an international payment within ECO, where is that payment going to be settled? They decided to host that institution either in Senegal or in Ivory Coast. If you're doing instant payment in ECO, like you're doing instant payment now, where do you have the infrastructure? The whole country, during that last discussion, they agree that Nigeria has the best institution and that is going to be based in Nigeria. So there is ongoing, even World Bank funded projects around putting in place the infrastructure, the financial infrastructure to move towards adopting a common currency within the sub-region. Now, what you talk about, what is the Nigerian influence within the sub-region? Of course, if our economy is able to develop and develop well, the entire region, as the director of study of CIAF, I believe, said, the entire region is going to benefit from it. Now, what is Tinubu going to do about it? That's linked to the first question about removal of subsidy. That is gone for now. The other issue people are talking about is Nigeria has one of the lowest tax across the sub-region. You find it difficult to believe that in Cotonou, the VAT is about 18%. In Nigeria, 10% is still issue to pay. You understand? So and a good number of Nigeria are just outside the tax bracket. So it's out to improve the taxation, increase government spending. But you cannot do that with authority, with legitimacy, if people don't see that this is good for them. And that's why the corruption question is important. In my view, can I continue? Have I exceeded my time? Can I continue?
Yeah. But before you continue, let me give the floor to Afuda Vincent for his question, because we just have now 10 minutes to close.
Okay.
The webinar.
Okay.
So, Vincent, and those who want to speak, please raise your hand so that we can see how we can manage the rest of the time before closing everything. Vincent, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon to all. I have one question for the three panelists. What do you think or suggest as Tinubu's policy on governance issues in the ECOWAS country? In particular, the issue of third presidential term, which is currently being debated and even protested in Senegal. Thank you.
Thank you, Vincent Afuda. Ebenezer, you can take the floor on this point. What do you think about term elongation, presidential third elongation, or if you want constitutional review or reforms in the sub in order to the third mandate? What do you think about that?
On this, I would like to suggest a very beautiful book written by an American professor called Revolutionary Constitution. The name of the author is Bruce Ackerman. He's a prof of law and political science at Yale. It's a 3-volume book, and he suggested the basic of his theory is to explain how there's no perfect constitution in the world, and that having third or fourth or fifth term is not necessarily good or bad. Really, it's not necessarily good or bad.
So you are pro-third mandate. You are pro-third mandate.
No, it's not a pro-third. It's the justification for it. I'm not just saying you don't need it. You don't need a third mandate or fifth mandate or seventh mandate. We know how long Angela Merkel stayed on power in Germany, for God's sake. That's not the issue. It's not, my issue is not the mandate, it's the rationale behind it. If it is to keep one person in power, we don't need it. So it's the rationale behind it for me.
So do you
now,
think that
policy
administration, do you think
issues
that
are internal
administration
matter.
would be
Yes.
category with this point?
Political issues are internal matter, and I don't think Nigerians have to give other countries, have to lecture other countries on how to resolve their internal issue. What we can do, and what Nigeria is going to do, which is what I said when I started, is to lead by the power of our example. If we can stay a democratic country, if we can stay true to the protection and grow our own economy, if Nigeria can stand tall within the sub-region, the citizens of this country will look at it and say, look, what are you doing? Look at this big country with all their problems, but they are doing well. Because the reason why it is easy for authoritarian or semi-authoritarian regime to emerge within our sub-region is because there's this belief that democracy has failed, especially in the French-speaking world. Now, someone needs to prove that democracy can work on the African context. And Nigeria is best placed for that. So for me, it's not about Tinubu. What can Tinubu do in the case of Senegal, for example? Tell Sal not to do what he's doing. This is what we are saying we don't want Western country to do, right? Interfering in our internal affairs. So the only thing we Nigerians can do is to lead by the power of our example. And this is why having an election and a transition is very good. But I would like to say something before I finish about corruption, because that is very important. Yeah. I had a debate with someone.
And it would be, if you want, it will be your conclusive remarks, if you want.
Yes. So just take seconds. Just take seconds. Corruption is not just about the money being taken from government and then denying people infrastructure. Corruption undermines the national project itself. Because people are not ready to make a sacrifice about the project if some people are going to take it for their personal gain. And so if you're going to ask your people to make sacrifice, to commit themselves to an ideal, they have to know that in this project, they are not serving the interest of 1, 2, or 3, or 4 families at the expense of their own comfort. So the reason why Tinubu's administration need to fight corruption is really not because corruption takes money and then we don't build infrastructure. Yeah, that's a good argument to make. But then if you want to tax people, and that's why taxing in Nigeria is difficult. If you want to tax people, they will ask you, but what have you done with the oil money? If you do something good with the oil money and they see people are ready to contribute more, because the Nigerian pays a lot in churches to fund their faith. If they can do that, they can do that for their country. But you have to prove to them that this is about them and not about the very few people in the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ebenezer. Pelumi, for you, what does the future hold? What should be the features of the future?
Thank you for your question. So for the future, we hope to see more leadership from the part of Nigeria. Features of the future, you already mentioned the issue of corruption. So if we can minimize that to a large extent, and like I said when I spoke earlier, we also need an overall, like a restructuring of Nigeria's foreign policy, architecture, and infrastructure to ensure that we are delivering where it matters. So what the future holds, given the right leadership, is more leadership in West Africa and in the larger African context for Nigerian foreign policy, and also more influence, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Professor Bolarinwa, I would like to ask you the same question to wrap up. For you, what does the future hold, and what should be the features of the future about Nigeria policy and leadership in the sub-region and over the continent?
Well, the future will always be bright. The future will always be good. And I hope that with the advent of this new administration led by President Tinubu, there is a lot for us, good for us going to the future. Particularly, they said the foreign policy of every nation is a reflection of its domestic politics and environment. So if domestically everything is put rightly, security, architecture overhauled, like Pelumi mentioned, the economy overhauled, and corruption, like my brother said earlier too, if corruption can also reduce, then it will go a long way domestically. Employment will be made, issues around the fuel subsidy, oil sector will be resolved. And from there, Nigeria can project very well, especially in the sub-region. But the good news is that even the president himself mentioned it in his first statement on the day of inauguration. He said the sub-region will be well taken care of and the sub-region will be looked at. ECOWAS is at the beckon of Nigeria, and Nigeria will lead very well. But you know, there is this Chinese adage that says 1,000 sheep led by a lion can win many battles, but 1,000 lions led by a sheep cannot win a single battle. Here we are talking about when you have a strong leadership or good leadership, then there will be also a corresponding good followership. So if Nigeria can lead very well at the domestic front, leading by example like other speakers have said, and at the same time on the external side, Nigeria will just follow, or Nigeria will just lead and others will follow. But quickly in few seconds, the issue of eco currency, I was thinking I'll be able to say something earlier. There is more to the eco currency. There is so much, Pelumi nearly hit it on the edge. There is so much politics and politicking over the issue of eco currency, particularly from the Francophone countries within ECOWAS, and especially led and instigated by France itself. You know that all of the currencies that you spend in Francophone countries are printed in Paris. So to France, if eco currency come on board, if it comes on board, and like my brother said earlier in his own too, that where would they print it from? So France want to be printing for the entire ECOWAS? No. Nigeria is there. Nigeria is Anglophone. And Nigeria is big enough that can produce or print those currencies or will do anything. But France will not want it because that will reduce the French domination in Francophone West Africa. And that's why France deliberately have been frustrating the kicking off or the launching of eco currency. And that was what also instigated Alassane Ouattara and Sarr from Senegal and Côte d'Ivoire, pushed by Macron, and they went and launched another parallel eco currency, which was meant to be a grand project of the entire ECOWAS. So you can see that they're already prejudicing, politicking, and all of that. But like all the two speakers said earlier, it is not a one-man show. If Nigeria pushes it too much, they will say Nigeria, you know, severally in the literature, Nigeria has been described as a regional hegemon, dominating others. And that has been the statement of France in order to make sure that they break the influence of Nigeria in West Africa. Yet Nigeria has been helping all of the West African countries, security-wise, economic-wise, social-wise, cultural-wise, and everything. But now, with the advent of the administration of President Tinubu, I know reforms will be added to it. Strong leadership will be added to it. Good vision, good direction, good leadership will be the order of the day. And we hope everything will happen by the grace of God. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Bolarinwa, the Director of Research at the Nigerian Institute for International Affairs. Thank you, Ebenezer Oloudamilare, who is an independent policy analyst. Thank you, Pelumi Obisesan-Aina, researcher at the Center for Democracy and Development in Nigeria. thank you all, those who have been with us since the commencement of this webinar. I forget to apologize to the majority or the quasi totality of the audience who is Francophone. And sometimes I realize that the challenge of speaking in English has jeopardized a bit the capacity to ask questions, to participate in the debate. We will try to do better for the forthcoming webinar so that we can have translation during the webinar so that everybody can participate really. So thank you.
And I can speak French. So next time I would have spoken French if anybody needed to.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Pelumi. Thank you, you guys. And see you very soon. Thank you for all those who have taken the leadership for organizing this webinar. Vincent Aguet, Emmanuel Koukoubu, Thierry Bidouzo, Marietta Gonrodobu, and Estelle Janator, who are behind, but efficiently behind us. Thank you so much and see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
See you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for.
Bye.
Président.
Personne ne regarde devant, c'est dangereux pour pas derrière.
Président, j'ai enlevé les noms signifiés. J'espère qu'on est entre nous.
When they don't know,